Hi, everybody. So I originally was going to do this live stream at 11 o'clock, but I decided to do it early just due to my own time constraints. So if you guys don't catch this live, then just post your comments in the comment section. But I just re-premiered a video that I did probably about 2 years ago discussing Aristotle's view on the use of money and currency. Aristotle discussed use rates versus exchange rates. He discussed usury. He discussed the purpose of money, which is money is supposed to be used to facilitate the exchange of goods and services. And so when money is used in a manner that is mutually beneficial, then it actually serves its purpose, right? So if y'all didn't catch that video, go back and listen to it. But basically, everything is either good or bad based on its utility. So if money is serving its purpose, which is to facilitate the exchange of goods, then money is good. But when money is being used in an exploitative manner, where one side is gaining and the other side is losing, and one side isn't producing anything. He talked about money chasing and how you can become a slave to the invisible master. He talked about interest rates and how money, given an unnatural birth to itself, is unethical. Go back and watch that video for those who didn't catch it. But we're going to get deep into this whole monetary system because there's a lot of things that people are, I don't know, I think they have, we're basically being fed a whole bunch of lies, right? We're told that America is exceptional, that it's all based on hard work. We're told that basically we can just give to everybody, right? We can just give social services, free housing, all this stuff. What y'all don't understand is that the US dollar is exploitive. We have a service-oriented economy, and this economy would have fell and collapsed a long time ago, but for the fact that we have a fiat currency which is being imposed on the entire world. The US dollar is not based on anything. It's not based on gold. Which people are talking about that, but I'm not sure that people really understand the implications of that. Okay, another thing that people are saying is that we can just defund the military industrial complex and use that money to give social services for every. You can't. The reason why you can't is because the military industrial complex is the only thing that is sustaining the economy. That's the reason why they put so much emphasis on the military industrial complex. Most of these wars are really fought based on the fact that the U.S. is trying to impose centralized banking systems on these third world countries. So you don't have the overt oppression that you would have, previously, but you get to do it covertly through economic or the exchange rate. So we're going to get all into that. But first, I want to start out by playing this video by Bill Gates because people seem to think that Bill Gates actually supports population control. By the way, I've already stated Bill Gates has 3 children. So I sort of summarized his view on population control, but I want to show y'all this video so y'all know exactly what I'm talking about.
Let's go to a couple questions that we've actually received since we started the webcast. The first is on population growth, and the question is, one of our most pressing issues is population growth. How do you expect this to be addressed?
Well, the population growth issue at the global level is not that daunting. That is, the population percentage-wise is growing slower today than in the past, and so it will actually peak.
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure where he's getting his data. The population rapidly went from 1 billion to 8.5 billion. Bill Gates does not understand what population control is about. He thinks it's all about economics.
Peak out. The problem is that the population is growing the fastest where people are less able to deal with it. So it's in the very poorest places that you're going to have a tripling in population by 2050. And so their ability to feed, educate, provide jobs, stability, protect the environment in those locations mean.
So we're going to get all into this. Bill Gates is so full of shit. The third world is self-sufficient. The third world, they basically live off the land. And then we come in and tell them that we're going to improve their quality of life by enforcing a Western way of life on them. And then they're no longer self-sufficient. Now they're dependent on grocery stores and factory farming, and now they can no longer provide for themselves because they have destroyed the environment. So we can pretend that we're helping them by going in and changing their way of life, but we're not. We're the one who reap all the benefits. So he's focusing on the so-called poor countries, which are actually wealthy. We're the poor countries. The Western world is poor. Our wealth is stolen from the third world, and he's getting this shit ass backwards.
They're faced with an almost impossible problem.
By the way, before I forget, I want y'all to know that for those of you who do advocate for socialism, I want y'all to know that the socialist countries that have a high quality of life, a standard of living, those countries have very low population, the very low fertility rates. They have very stringent immigration policies, because when there are fewer people, that means there are more resources to go around. So you can't have infinite population growth and then expect everyone to have a high quality of life. So our resources are stolen from the third world. So when you artificially increase the U.S. population by bringing in hordes and hordes of immigrants, all you're doing is exploiting the third world. Like the American way of life is not sustainable. This is not a way of life that needs to be maintained. We need to get away from this global economy and teach Americans to become self-sufficient, to live off the land, to grow their own food. But to just bring in immigrants who are basically just going to oppress their own people, the U.S. dollar is inherently oppressive. And I'm going to get into all of that. But Bill Gates has this completely wrong. Overpopulation is not a third world problem. It's a developed world problem. We're the ones who have the high consumption. We're the ones who are so dependent on the third world. We don't produce shit. If the U.S. dollar collapses, we are done. None of us are able to provide food for ourselves. We're the ones who are dependent, not the third world. That is an illusion. That is a lie that they're trying to tell them, that they're going into these third world countries with these starving children, and we're giving them paper money in exchange for real wealth, and we're the ones who are generous. This Bill Gates is completely full of shit.
Nigeria, Yemen, Chad. And so what we need to do is take this aid generosity and this innovation and go into those places.
See, so he calls it generosity. We're going in, giving them paper money, taking their natural wealth. We're raping the third world of gold, oil, diamonds, the metals that we use in our cell phones. And this is supposed to be generous, right? This is the reason why they're poor in the first place, by the way. God, I mean, so when you feed into this bullshit, then you think that there is something noble about capitalism, about this American way of life. But what y'all don't understand is that this US dollar is going to collapse. And then the chickens are going to come home to roost. And then you're going to see that we have been relying on the third world this entire time. What are we going to do? And really, I hate to say this, but it's really our fault, because we're so shallow, we're so materialistic, we don't pay attention to what's going on. And so this is the reason why a lot of those countries hate America. I they already know this stuff. The economists know this. The US dollar is artificially propped up, and we're just taking resources. But again, I'm going to get into all that in detail because I don't want you, I've said this before, but I want y'all to think that I'm making this stuff up. I actually want to go in detail. I know y'all said some of this content is too complicated, but I try to simplify it. I'm reading it, but I'm also explaining it as I'm going through it. So, if you have any questions, then you can just ask me. But at the end of the day, you should not be deferring to the so-called experts. You need to understand this for yourself. That this is a recipe for disaster. This is not a sustainable economy. It's doomed for collapse. And we keep talking about austerity, that we can just spin our way through it. No, when you spend money, you're not spending your wealth. The US dollar is not wealth. The wealth is coming from the third world. So when you spend that US dollar, all you're doing is oppressing the third world. So we need to curb this. You're not going to see the impact of it because it's not impacting you. We offshore the inflation, and we engage in economic manipulation, so where it impacts the third world. It eventually comes back to us, but again, I'm going to get into all that stuff.
Offer the women better tools where they want to space birthing or have a smaller family size, and improve health, because it's amazingly, as children survive, parents feel like they'll have enough kids to support them in their old age, and so they choose to have less children.
By the way, y'all know I'm an anti-natalist, but I'm not really here to promote that right now. But it is unethical to impose life to a new generation of essentially slaves, just so that you can have somebody to take care of you when you get older. But even aside from that, we keep talking about declining birth rates. That's actually not an issue because AI is eventually going to replace all of us, and we're all going to be put out the workforce, and we're basically going to be expendable. So our leverage is our labor, and once you don't need us because you're replacing us with AI, what are they going to do with all those people? Right? And then you're going to be completely dependent on the government giving you resources. Then you have no leverage whatsoever. There's so many things that I want to discuss right now, but one of the main reasons that they went back on that whole the jab is because people were pushing back. A lot of people refused it, and they were not going to go to work. They just quit. I'm not taking that shit. And so the Supreme Court had to pass a ruling the Supreme Court basically held that it was unconstitutional to require everybody to get vaccinated, because they already knew that it was going to destroy the economy, because a lot of people were pushing back against it. And I did a whole video even before the Supreme Court issued that ruling, explaining to y'all why it was unconstitutional, and it violated the Americans with Disability Act for employers to even ask whether you were vaccinated. There's privacy provisions within that. But again, I don't want to get too deep in that, but I want y'all to understand that in that scenario, your labor was your leverage. And without that leverage, you're basically going to be at the mercy of the state, and the state can do whatever it wants.
Niger right now, it's still 7 children per family, whereas in the richer countries, you're often at a stable point of which is 2.1 or even less. And so it's really...
The reason he's saying 2.1 is considered replacement rate, which I don't know what the 0.1 is. You either have 2 children or you don't. Bill Gates has 3 children, which is above replacement rate. So Bill Gates is actually adding to population growth. But again, Bill Gates thinks that overpopulation is a third world problem, not a problem for the developed world, which all of the economic data goes contrary to what he's saying. So Bill Gates is not a real proponent of population control. If y'all notice, the countries that he's focusing on, these are primarily African or Arab countries, he's not saying that he's not saying this for the European countries, which is also another contradiction because the Europeans are also told not to procreate because of overpopulation. And there's population control is heavily promoted in Europe. And in Europe, in America, it's just promoted as a conspiracy theory that most people don't even know what it actually means. Now, I am a proponent of population control, but what it actually means is incentivize population. It's not through coercion. It's basically eliminating economic incentives for procreation, right? And then basically rewarding people for not procreating. And we have tax incentives for people to procreate, and we're rewarding immigration. That's completely ass backwards. This economy is not sustainable. And I don't know, y'all. At the end of the day, procreation is a luxury, right? People will talk about how they're going to cut back on going to the grocery store and doing all. No, the main driver of poverty is going to be procreation. So without the economy basically rigging the system and rewarding bad behavior, because if you can't, it's not just bad for you, it's bad for the environment, it's bad for the third world, it's bad for everybody. And I'm going to eventually come back and talk about overpopulation, but I'm not doing that right now because I really want to stick to the economy. And this is about done. I'm about to get into this article.
An acute problem in a certain number of places, and we've got to make sure that we help out with the tools now so that they don't have an impossible situation later.
Right. So I don't this whole notion that Americans are helping the third world is a complete lie. It's like you took all their wealth and then you came in with your paper money and then you're pretending that you're feeding these people when they actually could have fed themselves if the U.S. just fucking stayed out. And then we're also stealing their land. And the argument is, oh, we pay for it. Yeah, you pay for it with paper money, and you're getting a tangible good out of that. You're getting land, you're getting raw materials. So we're going to get into this article right now. This is make sure y'all can see it. Okay, the US dollar and new imperialism under the logic of capital accumulation. Gosh, why did that just change? What in the hell just happened? Okay, I don't know what just happened. Let me pull that back up. Okay. Never happened before because it went back to the original article, not the one that I highlighted. So, let me make this bigger. In the wake of the Second World, the USA, along with its strong economic and military strength, established an international monetary system centered on the US dollar. This gave USD the status of world currency and bounded it to a US imperialist hegemony with mutual integration and interaction, making it possible for USD capital to conduct international exploitation and wealth plundering extensively around the world. Now, I don't know if y'all are going to stay around, but I want y'all to understand that the military industrial complex is what is sustaining this economy. Again, for those of you who just came in, the reason that we have all those wars is to impose a centralized banking system on to the entire world, and the U.S. Dollar is at the helm of it as the world currency. Since the end of the Second World War, territorial occupation and colonial rule were gradually replaced by economic control and political intimidation. Lenin's argument that in the field of economic science that studies the changes in the form of modern capitalism, the issue of imperialism is not only one of the most important issues, but can be said to be the most important one, is still of great significance. At the global level, The USA can plunder wealth and exercise imperial hegemony around the world. This is due to the special status of US dollar, USD, as a world currency, which continuously consolidates the imperial hegemony of the USA. Thus, currency is the embodiment of social relations. The USD was by no means predestined to be a world currency, nor is it irreplaceable. Its power and status are nothing but the external manifestation of U.S. imperialism. This paper exploits the nature and the inherent contradiction of the new imperialism by analyzing the inherent contradictions of USD as the world currency. I want y'all to understand that when people talk about white supremacy, they're not talking about white people. White is not a race. White is a social status. And somebody even told me that even though I'm not white, I'm socially white because I'm educated, because I live in a first world country. I told y'all the actual races is Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. So again, white is not a race. It is a social status that and this is the reason why everybody hates. Gosh, I mean, I'm trying to explain to y'all, but I'm trying to also not offend people. When they talk about white supremacy, I want you to understand they're not talking about you. They're talking about this system. This is, I guess you could accurately call it the Western supremacy. The Western way of life that we basically impose our will on the entire world. It's eventually going to bite us in the ass. I mean, that movie on Netflix, they were talking about that, how they're going. I don't. I mean, I want y'all to understand that. On the one hand, they hate Americans because they see us as their oppressors, and that's all of us. That's even if you're black. We're the oppressors of the entire world, but at the same time, they're jealous of us. So they want to come to America. They want this way of life, and then basically they want to become quote unquote white supremacists. They want to do the same thing to their own people that we're doing to them. So I want y'all to understand that this is not sustainable. We are raping the country. I told y'all that Americans consume 20 to 60 times as many resources as those in the third world. And we're not actually paying for it. It talks about wealth plundering and excessive waste is what it is. And I mean, there are people who say that we can just continue having all these children and it's just about poor management of resources. I would tend to disagree. I think that at some point, this whole system is going to implode and we're going to be hard hit because we have no ability to provide for ourselves. Let me see if I have any comments before I keep going. Okay. When the fiat currency of a country takes the role of world currency in order to maintain the stability of a world currency, it is necessary to match the amount of gold reserves and currency issuer. Otherwise, if the quantity of currency is issued by a country exceeds by far the amount of its gold reserves, although this access can enable currency issuers to obtain a certain coinage tax, it will generate worldwide inflation and pose questions about the convertibility of the currency. So I want y'all to understand that this is a scam and it's supposed to be a secret. I mean, it's not even a secret. I think people are realizing that that the US dollar is not backed by anything, but they're so deeply entrenched into it because if they pull out, their economies are going to collapse also because everybody economy revolves around the US dollar. This will trigger bank runs that can evacuate the gold reserves of the country issuing sovereign currency and eventually overthrow its status as world currency. Given this contradiction, the sustainability of a sovereign country as a world currency and a relative stability of its monetary value are based on a country's hegemonic position in the world. When the growth of gold reserves of a country cannot keep abreast of the rapid growth of global economic activities, the order of international economic activities and the interest of currency issuers can only be maintained by the established of hegemony. Um, this is the reason why we need to have a strong military, because if not for the military, they would basically get rid of the U.S. dollar. Based on the history of the world currency, the USK first established the gold standard system of the world currency. The UK was at that time the world's largest industrial and trading country. The British pound, freely convertible into gold, executed the function of world currency. In the late 19th century, the UK's economic status declined, and the long-term deficit in industrial product exports threatened the convertibility of the pound. To maintain the confidence of other countries in the pound, Britain cleared the deficit by plundering wealth from the colonies, especially India, and conducting illegal trade. Right, and America is doing the same thing, but we're going to get into that, because so basically, when you have an economic deficit, you can use that currency to just make up for it by taking wealth from the third world. After the end of the Second World War, the empire on which the sun never sets was already in the doldrums. There was not much left of the gold reserves, about 6.23% of the world's total. The economic and military strengths were plummeting. Following this, the overseas colonies sought independence. The pound could not maintain its free convertibility into gold and was forced to surrender its position as the world currency. Meanwhile, there's a deeper story about how we got currencies in the first place, which I'm not going to say that on YouTube, how these monetary systems were set up. Yeah, I'm not going to say it on YouTube. I wish I could say it, but I wish I could give you a hint, but I don't think I can even do that without having this live stream taken down. Meanwhile, the U.S. on the other side of the ocean was not at all dragged down by the war. Instead, it amassed fabulous wealth from it. After the war, it aggregated about 75% of the world's gold. With the backing of strong gold reserves and a status of world's largest creditor country, USD became the world's largest settlement currency. A gold exchange standard is established, that is, USD and gold remain convertible, and other countries' currencies are pegged to the USD with a certain exchange rates. Nonetheless, this seemingly viable monetary system is no exception to the inherent contradictions of the world currency. With the gradual recovery and rapid growth of the post-war economy of Germany, France, Japan, and other countries, these countries amassed a large amount of USD foreign exchange in the international trade market, with a short-term USD debt exceeding the US gold reserves. Uncertainty about the convertibility of the USD caused the speculation of the USD in the financial market and the demand for exchanging USD to gold from European countries, resulting in the continuous outflow of gold reserves. Okay, so this is the important part right here. In 1971, the USA decided to abandon the convertibility of USD, declaring the decoupling of the USD from gold. In 1973, the USD denominated gold exchange standard collapsed. So this is not a secret. They already eliminated the gold standard. That the US dollar is based on nothing. That's the difference between money and currency. Currency is based on force. You have a strong military. All you have to do is go around the world and force them to accept your centralized banking system. By the way, that is the reason why we went into Libya. That is the reason why we went into Iraq. They come up with these lies to say that they're attacking their own people and all. No. The reason that we invade those countries is to force them into the centralized banking system where the US dollar uh, reigns supreme. The de-anchoring of the USD from gold declared the end of the world currency system based on convertible gold in the absence of other countries comparable to the credit of USD. The status of USD went up instead of down. Thus, USD replaced gold as the main currency of the world reserve. In the world currency system of non-monetized gold, the floating exchange is legalized. However, the floating exchange did not solve the inherent contradiction of the world currency. On the contrary, due to the disengagement of convertibility into gold, USD lost its external constraint to maintain a stable value. It lost its external constraint, which means the gold was a limitation, a natural limitation to the supply of the US dollar. But once you remove the gold standard, now you can just have an unlimited supply of money. So people will talk about how austerity stimulates the economy. Spend, spend, spend. No, it doesn't. All it does is create debt, which eventually has to be paid. And how we're paying it right now is by just extracting more resources from the third world. But once they wake up to this okey doke and they realize what is going on, and a lot of these countries are waking up, by the way, but they just don't know what to do about it. America is done. What are we going to do when these countries abandon the U.S. dollar? Okay, when different targets collide, the U.S. government is very likely, as it turns, to sacrifice the indicator of current stability. And then y'all know the indicator is always the GDP. They always talk about how corporations are doing. They never really focus on how the common man is doing. The GDP is not a good indicator because these are global markets, which are manipulated through exchange rates, and so it really does not actually show how the economy is doing. It's not showing how the American people are able to put food on the table. It's the worst indicator possible. The How the corporations are doing does not say anything about the about what's going on the ground. This determines the inherent instability of USD as a world currency, with the rapid rise of countries such as Germany and Japan. The unstable USD attracted strong competitors such as the Dutch mark and the Japanese yen in order to maintain the world currency status of USD. The USA, like the former UK, embarked on the path of state hegemony, right? So there were people that were, or other countries that were trying to have a competing currency, but the U.S., that's the reason why the U.S. had to beef up their military operations to make sure that the U.S. dollar remained supreme. The USD, which acts as the world currency, can be categorized by channel. The official channel of USD and USD used for private transactions. The official channel of USD refers to USD assets held by central banks, including various types of USD bonds. For other countries except for the USA, there are three major ways to obtain this type of USD: to directly purchase USD bonds approved by the US Congress and designed by the US Treasury, to buy USD or USD bonds in an international foreign exchange market, and to directly apply directly for USD loans. The USD obtained through official channels directly forms the country's foreign exchange reserves, which are used to regulate the international balance of payments and local currency rates. This is really important. I want y'all to understand that the exchange rates really make or break a country's entire economy. And this is completely arbitrary, right? They arbitrarily decide which countries should have a high exchange rate or a low exchange rate. And it's based on objectives which serves the U.S. interests. So if you're useless to America, then your exchange rate is going to be very low. Other countries, well, okay, useless. And I don't mean economically or in terms of research. I mean strategically. If you are not useful, I'm going to get into that a little bit later, but it's completely arbitrary. It's completely exploitive. And if your currency is devalued, then it's nearly impossible for you to get out of debt because that country is always going to be in debt to the US or to other countries like Haiti. So there's no way for them to build their way out because the exchange rate is so oppressive. They will be in a perpetual state of debt. So the only way to liberate those countries is to eliminate the centralized banking system. But if you do that, the result is you're going to destroy the American economy because we are not self-sufficient and we are dependent on exploitation from the third world. So what are we going to do? Let's keep going. Although USD obtained from private channels is issued by the Federal Reserve, it is essentially a debt borrowed by the US government from the Fed with interest payment and future taxes as collateral. Right. So they're borrowing from the Federal Reserve, and then your tax dollars are the collateral, which your tax dollars can never repay that. So America is also in a perpetual state of debt. This is a recipe for disaster. At some point, that debt is going to have to be paid. It's not based on, this is a Ponzi scheme. As the world currency, USD essentially represents a debt relationship with the US government. Thus, the so-called dollar standard is essentially the debt standard. This is debt. That's what it is. That US note that you have in your wallet, that is debt. That is not money. That is currency. The movement of USD as the world currency can be seen in a circulation pattern centered on the US government. It's moving among central banks around the world. However, this kind of movement is asymmetric. For countries that have obtained an abundance of USD through trade surpluses, these USD are essentially debts. Okay, I want y'all to understand that. We're getting actual valuable materials. We're getting gold, silver, diamonds, metals for our cell phones, raw materials, labor, labor. We're getting shoes and clothing, and all they're getting is a US note, which is debt. So they're gonna, we're in a perpetual state of debt, but they're in a worse perpetual state of debt because their debt can never be repaid and it's attached and contingent upon our debt and our ability to value their debt or their monetary system. So how are they ever going to get out of debt? They can't. It's impossible. For countries that have obtained an abundance of USD through trade surpluses, these USD are essentially debts. The fluctuations of USD exchange rates will seriously affect the market of the country's foreign exchange assets. So, depending on how you value their money or their currency, you can make or break their economy. So, even if you are importing their goods, you can essentially devalue their goods by manipulating their currency, the exchange rate of their currency. I want y'all to understand. I know this is complicated, but this international trade system is completely rigged. It's rigged in our favor, but I want y'all to see down the road that this only benefits corporations and that ultimately we get fucked too. Where was I? In order to guarantee the security of USD debts assets held, these countries were forced to become fixed buyers of bonds issued by the USA by the end of January 2016, U.S. Treasury bonds accounted for half of China's foreign exchange reserve. Since the first trade deficit in 1976, the USA has seen a persistent deficit. Right, we see a persistent deficit, but it does not impact us because we basically just pass it on to the third world. As the size of the U.S. trade deficit continues to expand, the movement of USD between the USA and its creditor countries is characterized by a steadily reinforced one-way net outflow that deviates from the USA. For countries with serious shortages of USD reserves to obtain sufficient USD for international trade and other needs, they need to obtain USD loans through mortgage of their own assets. I want y'all to let that sink in. So, in order to be a player internationally, in order to even sell their goods, they have to get in debt first in order to get the money, right? Because we're the ones that supplying it, and their currency is basically just I don't know, a localized version of the U.S. dollar. That's basically what it is. So it's still dependent on the U.S. dollar. In order to get that, they basically have to mortgage their own assets. So they're going to be in a perpetual state of debt. You can never get out of that. Okay, let's see if am I in support of going back to the gold standard? The problem is that if we went back to the gold standard, we would be the ones who would lose. We would be fucked. The only reason that America is so prosperous is because we don't have a gold standard. And then we get to rape the third world. So the gold standard, I don't know. I think that we would first have to become self-sufficient. We would have to learn how to grow our own food, to become self-sufficient, to, have local economies, which I've been trying to tell people. We need to have local economies. We need to get out this global system because it is doomed to fail. So we do need to get away from the gold standard, but it's not us who wants to who really has a desire for the U.S. to go back to the gold. It's the third world, because if we go back to the gold standard, then their currencies will actually have fair exchange rates, and right now we get to manipulate that. So we have a hegemony over the world currencies. Okay, so these countries often have to sell domestic assets for debt service, repaying capital interest, thus furthering losing the ability to obtain USD through export earnings and international trade. Therefore, the size of their debt is constantly increasing. The movement of USD between the USA and US debtor countries is characterized by a continually reinforced one-way net inflow toward the USA. In both movements, the USA is an abundant beneficiary. For the former, low interest loans were obtained without reimbursing, and for the latter, high interest payments were reaped at low cost USD. There's a lot to try to unpack, but basically, there's no way for them to get out of this. We benefit from it. We get low. So when we borrow from them, we get low interest rates because of our currency, but they get high interest rates. So we get to rape the third world, take all their resources, and we're really not paying it. We're not paying anything. We're basically parasites. That's why I named this live stream a parasitic nation. We are the parasites of the world. We don't produce anything. I'm not going to say we don't produce anything, but what I'll say is that our value, if you're doing a cost benefit analysis, we're basically a strain on the entire world. Our way of life, the resources that we extract from the third world, all and what you can say that the America is giving, what America we're giving our culture, we're giving music. you can say that we are exporting democracy if you believe that democracy has any value. But that's all they're getting. That's all. I mean, they're not getting anything other than that. The USD circulates globally as a world currency and essentially working as an agent to rate various economic benefits worldwide. In an international trade market, the liberal trade advocated by neoliberalism is based on the establishment of an unequal exchange system with the U.S. at its core. The USA promotes the expansion of the USA promotes the expansion of neoliberalism around the world, persuading or forcing developing countries to abandon their protection over markets for goods and services so that USD capital can take advantage of cheap labor in developing countries and possess privatized assets. So we get the cheap labor. And by the way, we don't even have to outsource those jobs anymore. Now we can just bring the cheap labor into America, pay them under the table, and then we get the cut costs because now we don't even have to import them from other countries. So again, the only beneficiary of this entire thing are the corporations. It's not the American people. With its huge capital scale and technological advantages, USD Capital has incorporated developing countries which have become suppliers of cheap labor and commodities. Um, I want y'all to let that sink in. We're talking about incorporating developing countries. Um, Statism is basically corporate personhood. It is you basically get the privilege of engaging in international markets and being recognized as such. Palestine is not an incorporated state. Palestine cannot trade, or Palestine is completely dependent on Israel. That's the whole. At the end of the day, I told y'all the correlation between statism and capitalism, and this you're seeing this right at its root. That at the end of the day, corporations really corporations and states are essentially the same. It's just it varies in degrees, but that state is acting as a corporate entity. And then when you look at it domestically, the corporate entity known as the state actually oppresses its own people and becomes an end unto itself. But I'm not going to get into that right now. I'll talk about that later. But you can see that the state is acting as a corporate entity. Um, and then within that, we also have centralized banking system. So you have the Federal Reserve, which is also a player. And I don't know how this is supposed to work. I mean, if people really understood how the system worked, I think there would be panic. There would be panic all over. But this is not really that complicated. They wanted to make it complicated, but I'm trying to explain it to y'all so that y'all understand what's going on. They want you to be confused. And if you don't take the time to listen to, I'm explaining it to y'all, but as you can see, nobody's listening to this. This is probably boring content, but this is very important because when you talk about domestic policies, you talk about, oh, we're just going to spend more money. I want y'all to understand how that is going to impact other people. If you just start printing money, like you put people on house arrest and just printed money for unemployment, that money is coming from that wealth is coming from somewhere. It's not the money; it's the wealth. That U.S. note represents wealth, which is being taken from the third world. While enjoying cheap goods, the USA has retained the surplus value of workers produced by other countries in the form of reflux of USD capital. This unequal exchange is not only reflected in the division of labor, but also in the monopoly of USD on commodity pricing and currency. Right. So the USD determines how these goods are priced. And y'all hear Trump talking about imposing tariffs. You really don't even have to impose tariffs. All you would have to do is regulate their exchange rates. And that would just devalue their services and goods. I guess Trump doesn't understand economics that well either. You don't need to impose a tariff. You absolutely do not. Even when industrial production capacity and the gross value of tradable commodities decline in the USA, the USD can still participate extensively in international transactions unrelated to USA, serving as the most important pricing and trading currency. Right? The US dollar is used to price these goods. Therefore, when USD exchange rate fluctuates greatly, the domestic capital of the USA will not be affected and will seek benefit at the expense of other countries. Let me read that again. Therefore, when USD exchange rate fluctuates greatly, the domestic capital of the USA will not be affected and will seek benefit at the expense of other countries. So I want y'all to understand that you don't see the impact of it immediately, right? Because it's being offshore to these third world countries. This international economic system is not sustainable. This can go on temporarily, but it can't go on forever. They're not going to keep putting up with this. Somebody's going to eventually have to pay the piper. Former U.S. Secretary of State Kissinger wrote in Years of Upheaval that the two oil price hikes in the 1970s were driven mainly by the USA. U.S. policymakers used the embargo imposed by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries to rocket oil prices up, which was anticipated by the OPEC. The purpose of the USA was to exchange the balance of payments in the three major economic zones: Europe, the USA, and Japan. The USA estimated that Japan and Western Europe would face greater difficulties than itself in dealing with the rocketing oil prices. The US had gained enormous benefits from the crisis of its own making, and in the process successfully reduced its deficit. So, because okay, I don't know if I need to explain that, but basically, the U.S. Policymakers reduced its deficit by causing other countries to pay higher oil prices. That's essentially what happened. And you can bring entire countries to financial ruin by doing this. Um, and this is very dangerous. And this is the reason why America is so hated. In the international financial market, the free flow of USD has become a tool for redistribution of wealth. The USA has used various means to promote the opening of financial markets in developing countries and to incorporate other countries into USD-centered international financial system, further strengthening the USD-centered international currency system. The goal of the U.S. promotion of financial liberation is not to stimulate wealth production, but to redistribute world wealth and income, thus achieving a predatory accumulation. In the increasingly unified global financial market, the USA, as the world's largest capital owner and investor country, can influence the flow of capital and the redistribution of world wealth through the adjustment of interest rates and exchange rates. When the U.S. cuts its interest rates, its capital flow to countries with good economic development momentum will divide the surplus value created by workers in other countries in the form of industrial capital or interest earning capital. So I want y'all to let that sink in. It doesn't only benefit U.S., it also benefits its allies. So they're basically taking wealth from the third world and passing it on to European countries also, to Israel, right? Through the exchange rates. That's how this stuff works. This is a complete Ponzi scheme. Once the USA raises its interest rates, the capital will carry the surplus value of the goods back to USA, actualizing a transnational flow of wealth. Transnational, this impacts the entire world. When USD appreciates, USD denominated debt will increase, and the debtor country will have to sell its assets to pay the principal and interest. When USD depreciates, USD denominated debt will shrink, and USD denominated assets held by the creditor countries will suffer serious loss. So even though they're providing the resources, they're in a perpetuated state of debt, and just by devaluing their currency, they suffer serious losses, and their goods and services lose value. Just with the stroke of a pen. Considering that the USA is both a debtor and creditor country, it is both a capital exporting destination and a capital reflux destination. The USA can tailor its monetary policy to the needs of its own economic development and realize its monetary policy objectives by transferring other countries' wealth. That is exactly what's going on. They're just moving other countries' wealth all around the world. I think we're almost done. Yeah, we're almost done. The USD is not only a tool for transferring wealth from other countries, but also for exporting the crisis and protecting USD world currency status. Since the 1990s, the degree of financialization in the USA has escalated. The USD capital has penetrated into the industrial and financial sectors of other countries, making countries closer to each other, even if the U.S. economy declines. So they basically, what is it? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's basically what's going on. They're causing these countries to become allies because they're all being oppressed by the U.S. Since other nations' financial markets are deeply related to the U.S., it is difficult to give up USD to choose other currencies as the world currency. This was particularly evident after the 2007 financial crisis. Even though the instability and weakness of USD became a consensus, other countries were forced to continue to hold cheap credit for USD because of their massive USD assets. Right. So we basically have these countries by the balls because they're so deeply entrenched in it. They owe us all this debt, and they have to keep paying us. They have to keep paying that debt with their goods and services. So they can't dump it because they would have no way to pay that debt. Basically, the only way to get out this at this point is there's going to have to be a World War III, and if there is a World War III, we're not going to win because all these countries are just going to gang up on us. We have been bullying all these countries all this time, and this is not good. This is not good for us. So the person who asked me, should we go to a gold standard? They're going to force us. I don't know that it's going to be a gold standard, but they're going to be competitors in an international market. And once their currencies emerge as competitors, our economy is just going to tank. It should be noted that in the asymmetric movement of its world currency, USD can plunder wealth on a global scale through the form of international corporations and financial capital. The financial reason lies in the support of state hegemony. In the international trade market, the core position of the USA is not solely based on technological advantages, but also most importantly on the support of political and military power. This is what I told y'all. This is the reason why the military-industrial complex is so important. This is the reason why they need to spread democracy all over the world, because it puts us as the winner. You can't. We're too big to fail. So they hate any country that is resistant to democracy. They hate Palestine. They hate any country that is um, socialist or anything that's undemocratic. I want y'all to understand that democracy actually means capitalism. I mean, that's what it's become. So when they talk about imposing democracy on these countries, what they're really talking about is capitalism, with the U.S. dollar being the global exchange rate. That's really what's going on. So all this globally gawk that they're telling you, y'all need to understand what they're actually saying. Um, Under the coercion and attack of the U.S. military, that USD has guaranteed its position as the main currency in the world of mainstay commodities such as oil. In order to ensure the risk return of overseas USD capital, the USA exerts strong protection over its interests overseas through political pressure, strict intellectual property rights, and flexible market access thresholds. Y'all know I don't believe in intellectual property. Um, which I just did that video about capitalism and how property is theft. Really, what they're saying is capitalism is theft. That it capital is a creation of the state. That a state has recognized something to have value. Um, and then you can basically take land, you can take resources, and this is all being done through the exchange rate, through this monetary bullshit system. Since international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund are under the control of the U.S. government, when the interests of USD capital are threatened, other governments are under various pressures, and investors from the USA can enjoy overseas supreme power. So they're getting benefits from this also. Basically, you need to be aligned with America. You need to get in line with America, and then you're going to be prosperous also. That's how this works. In the financial market, the U.S. government has forced developing countries to open up financial markets and give unimpeded access to USD capital through a carrot and stick coercion and inducement approach, while forcing intervention in other countries' financial markets. So we're forcing these countries to accept our multinational corporations, to basically take their resources, and then we're convincing them that this is for their benefit because they're in such a deep perpetual debt they really don't have a choice. Um, but that really doesn't help them. All they it's a lose-lose situation. You can't win. You can't win. The system is so rigged. Like I said, the only way for them to get out this is going to be World War III, where the U.S. dollar is basically going to have to be destroyed. And in the meantime, I guess we're just going to keep raping the third world. But I want y'all to understand that is actually what's going to happen. When people talk about how we're helping the third world, we're giving them our money. No, that foreign aid bullshit. You are giving them paper money in exchange for valuable goods and services. You are dependent on the third world. The third world is not dependent on you. The USA adjusts USD interest rates and exchange rate pursuant to the interest that appeals to U.S. capital, regardless of the interests and protests of other countries. A strong state hegemony is the foundation for maintaining world currency status of the USD. Right. Hegemony. So again, this goes back to the military-industrial complex. I don't know how people are saying they're going to defund the military and just take that wealth and pay for other service. No, you can't do that. You would destroy the economy. Everybody would dump the U.S. dollar. So this is a mess. I think we're so deep into this. There's really no good way to fix it without serious economic ramifications. That Americans are going to suffer, and we're going to suffer hard. By collecting coinage tax, exerting unequal exchange, and manipulating financial markets on a global scale, the USA plunders the wealth produced by other countries. Since the Reagan administration began to suppress trade unions and lowering wages in the 1970s, the USA has taken the reduction of wages of workers as an important tool for preventing inflation. I want y'all to understand that this is the part where it affects us, because most of the time it's not going to affect us, but at the end of the day, the corporations always win, so they're going to win no matter what. So even if the American people have to suffer, they're just going to basically offshore your jobs. They're just going to bring in immigrants, and you're going to lose. So to effectively control wages, the USA does not hesitate to sacrifice domestic industrial entities and transfer industrial capital overseas by means of global industrial division of labor, and then obtain cheap goods produced overseas in the form of imports to reduce the cost of reproduction of domestic workers' labor. This led to the decline of U.S. real economy, right? Again, this is monopoly money. This is fiat currency. It's being propped up. They're sacrificing our long-term stability, right? Because the corporations get the benefit. They don't care. They're going to destroy our economy, and they're secure because they have divested their corporations all over the world. So they're too big to fail, but we can fail. I want y'all to understand that the American economy can collapse, even though those corporations will remain in existence. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the solution is. I'm trying to figure out what it is, but only thing I can say is everything that is being proposed right now is not a solution. The only solution really is for the United States economy to collapse, and that is going to allow all these other countries to thrive and become self-sufficient. But it's not, I mean, that's not going to benefit us, so we're not going to go down with the fight. Let me start over from that sentence. This led to the decline of the U.S. real economy, further exacerbating the current account deficit, which in turn puts the USD's debt size. This mode of operation, in which economic prosperity is maintained by debt and the world's working class is squeezed to maintain domestic capital profits, spreads the risk of inflation around the world. When inflationary pressures reach the critical point that the world economy can bear, the USD will collapse, will inevitably sweep the world. The USD collapse will inevitably sweep the world. Okay, so I think that is pretty much it. There may be a little bit here, but I think I'm going to stop. Oh, okay. I'm going to read this because I want y'all to understand the part about the military. With political hegemony and strong military power, the U.S. supports the plundering and accumulation of USD capital in the world. However, this inequitable and irrational capital accumulation system will maintain and continue for a certain period of time before this contradiction intensifies and eventually causes the USD-centered world currency system to collapse. As the world's largest currency, the second largest economy, and the largest USD foreign exchange reserve country, China does not have the corresponding currency recognition and rule-making rights. China is one of the biggest victims of the USD problem. In this current unequal USD-centered world currency system, China needs to participate in the international cooperation since the reform and opening and actively integrate into the globalization process with developed capitalist countries at the center. With that, I'm going to go ahead and end this. I appreciate you for still being here. I know this is boring material, but um, okay, so that's me actually explaining it in detail, and this article really does sum it up. But I mean, when I do my other live streams, when I'm just summarizing stuff, then I can try to explain it and make it more entertaining. I know this was pretty dry material, but I do think that it was important for y'all to understand what is going on, especially in this upcoming election. People are making false promises. So I'm going to go ahead and end this live stream. And I'm sorry that there are more people here, but hopefully y'all will catch the replay. So y'all have a good day.